Hello, are you ready to hear more stories about Thomas the Tank Engine and his Friends by Christopher Awdry? These stories are taken from the book Gordon the High-Speed Engine, and the first is called Highspeed Gordon. Donald was excited. "The diesels at yon works," he announced, "say that on the other railway there are things called high-speed trains. They have a diesel engine at each end and can go at 125 miles an hour. Gordon snorted. "An engine at each end," he said scornfully. "There's only one of me, but I bet I can go as fast as those smelly boxes on wheels. Probably faster," he added. The others said nothing. They had heard Gordon's boasting before. Gordon was still bragging the next morning. "Speed's nothing to me," he said. "Why, one of my Doncaster cousins went at 126 miles an hour. I'll show these diesels a thing or two, just you wait and see." He puffed grandly towards the station. Gordon normally pulled the express, though Henry, James or Bear helped if Gordon was ill or away. Many visitors came to see the Fat Controller's railway. They often used the express, so it was usually full and heavy. There had been frost during the night, and now the weather was wet and sleety. Sleet settled on the rails, making an icy film across their surface. The carriages of the express stood under the cover of the station roof, but when Gordon was coupled to them, his cab and front end had to stand outside. He grew colder and colder as he waited for the guard to blow his whistle and wave his green flag. "Come on," he shivered impatiently. "Let's get started." At last Gordon heard the whistle. "Come on, come on, come on, come on, come on," he shouted as he tried to pull quickly away. But his wheels slipped on the icy rails. The sudden movement made water in his boiler surge forward, and Gordon's driver could not shut off steam. Gordon moved a yard and slithered to a standstill, held back by the heavy train. His wheels spun furiously, but neither Gordon nor his train budged an inch. "Help! Help!" wailed Gordon despairingly, but nobody could. His wheels spun until his rods ached, but he could do nothing to stop them. His driver tried every trick he knew. An inspector came and tried some more, but it was no good. The Fat Controller came to see what the fuss was about. He said several things to Gordon, but Gordon was making so much noise that he couldn't hear them. Sparks showered from the rails, but Gordon's wheels went on spinning. It was a quarter of an hour before Gordon had used up all his steam. Reduced pressure allowed the driver to close the regulator, and with a deep sigh of relief, Gordon felt his wheels stop turning. The silence was amazing. Donald came to take Gordon to the shed, and Henry came to pull the express. When the train had gone, workmen had to replace the rails where Gordon had been standing, because his spinning wheels had worn deep grooves in them. The shed was empty. Donald tactfully remembered another job and left Gordon on his own. But that night Gordon heard a whisper from close by. "Did you hear," it hissed, "how Gordon went for a spin today?" There was a quiet chuckle. Gordon seethed in silence. "High-speed engines are all very well," the whisper went on, "but Gordon ought to know by now that he's supposed to move his train too." Gordon snorted disgustedly, and with a gasp the whisperer subsided into silence. The next story is Smokescreen. Gordon was feeling stuffed up. "It's the coal, Gordon," explained his fireman. "It's clogging up your tube something awful, but we'll have to make do with it, for there's nothing else." "Why not have a good sneeze, Gordon?" suggested Henry, thinking of the time when he'd punished some boys for dropping stones on him. "That will clear your tubes." "Certainly not," replied Gordon with dignity. "The Fat Controller wouldn't approve. He didn't like your sneeze, I seem to remember." Next day, Gordon was nervous as he backed onto the express. "At least I shan't slip today," he thought, "but I suppose they'll laugh at me again if I don't keep time." He needn't have worried. By the time he reached the junction, he was running nicely, and as he approached Edward Station, Gordon's fireman began to make up the fire. "Let's get a good run at the hill while you've got steam to do it," he said. "I don't trust this low-grade coal." At the station, a party of wedding guests, all in their best clothes, was standing on the platform. As Gordon swooshed through, running hard for the hill, smoke from the newly made fire streamed from his funnel. He disappeared into the distance and left a black smoke screen settling over the station. It covered everything, wedding guests and all, in a coat of soot and smuts. Waves to Gordon became shaking fists, and the wedding party hurried angrily to the station master's office. At the end of the line, an inspector came to see Gordon. His message from the Fat Controller was short, but not sweet. "It's not fair," Gordon complained to Boko. "How could I help that smoke? It's not my fault the coal's dirty." "Never mind," said Boko encouragingly. "Where would I be if I got upset every time someone called me smelly? Anyhow, soot's good for the garden, my driver says." "But not for new clothes," muttered Gordon. Gordon was extra careful on the way home, but it wasn't his lucky day. The Fat Controller had broken a journey to the other railway to apologise to the people at Edward Station. He had done his best and was waiting for another train when Gordon came by. As the express thundered through, a cloud of something flew from it and landed on the Fat Controller's new top hat. When Gordon reached the big station, there was another message waiting for him. "The Fat Controller says," announced the inspector, "that Gordon blew ashes on his top hat as he passed Edward Station." Gordon was horrified. "Wheesh!" he exclaimed indignantly. "I did not. I was being extra careful." "I'm sure the Fat Controller can't be right," put in Gordon's fireman. "I can't help it," said the inspector. "That's what he says, so there it is. He will speak to Gordon when he gets home." Gordon went sadly back to the shed. Poor Gordon. Let's hope the Fat Controller isn't too cross with him. And we can hear more about Gordon in the next story, Fire Escape. "Driver says the Fat Controller's coming home tomorrow," said James a week later. Gordon grunted. He wasn't anxious to see the Fat Controller. "I must do well today," he said to himself as he waited to start the express. "A good run today might help if the Fat Controller hears about it." Things did not begin well, though. Thanks to a last-minute passenger, they were late starting, which meant that Gordon missed his path at the junction and was delayed there too. But with a clear run after that, they flashed through Edward Station, going splendidly. They were halfway up the hill when there was a clatter beneath Gordon's cab. Suddenly, he felt a blast of cold air in his middle, as if there were a gap between his boiler and cab. "Oof!" he gasped. "What's happened?" The fireman looked at his fire. There was a gaping hole in the middle where the fire bars had collapsed and a large part of the fire had disappeared. "You've lost part of your fire, Gordon," the fireman explained. "What a place to do it." Already Gordon was feeling weaker. Without a full fire, his steam pressure and speed fell quickly. But his driver knew what to do. "Find the biggest piece of coal you can and put it across the hole," he told the fireman. "That will stop some of the cold air from getting in, and we'll be able to hold steam better. But hurry, or the hill will beat us." The fireman hurried. A large lump of coal lay near the front of the tender. Quickly he moved it into place with his shovel and a long steel bar. Gordon felt better at once. "Now build the fire gently round the edges," said the driver, and, as the fireman did so, the driver adjusted Gordon's controls to make the best use of his steam. "Right, Gordon," he said when the fireman had finished. "Now it's up to you." Gordon tried his hardest, but it was tough going. "I must do it, I must do it," he told himself as he pounded up the hill. He had stuck here once before and was determined not to fail again. Poor Gordon was getting very breathless. "I will do it, I will do it," he panted, but he was careful not to pant too loudly in case he blew away what was left of his fire. He shut his eyes and struggled on. At last, Gordon felt that the slope was easier to climb. Cautiously, he opened one eye. Yes, he was nearly at the top. "I've done it! I've done it!" he gasped triumphantly. The fireman mopped his brow. "That was splendid, Gordon," he said, "and now you deserve a rest." A signalman turned them into a goods loop and telephoned the works for a pilot engine to be prepared. While they waited, the passengers got out and told Gordon what a useful engine he was. Boko was at the works to help, and the two engines finished the journey without further trouble. At the end of the line, the Fat Controller was waiting for them. To Gordon's surprise, he was smiling. "Thank you, Boko," he said, "and thank you, Gordon, for a splendid effort. I am pleased with your work today, though certain, other things leave much to—" But just then, a whistle blew, and the Fat Controller had to hurry to his carriage. Once again, poor Gordon was left in suspense. Oh dear, what is going to happen to Gordon? Let's find out now in Gordon Proves His Point. One day, Gordon reached the big station on the mainland to find the platform crowded. "It's a rail tour," explained his driver. "Going along the coastline to Carlisle, I think." The station master came up. "Can you help?" he asked. "These rail tour people are stuck because their train has failed. Could Gordon take them in his train, please?" Gordon's driver laughed. "You'll have to hold him back, eh, Gordon?" he said. "But you need the Fat Controller's permission. And what about our return train?" The Fat Controller agreed at once, and then the station master rang the shed. "What can you substitute for Gordon's Express?" he asked. "There's the high-speed train that came yesterday," they suggested. "It's only got one power car working, but it should keep the Fat Controller's timing." Philippa, she preferred Pip for short, and Emma were delighted to stand in for Gordon. Pip's cooling system was faulty, making her hot and bothered, but Emma didn't mind doing all the work. They felt honoured to visit the Fat Controller's railway. James, following a little later with a stopping train, was surprised when the signalman at the station beyond the works came up. "That high-speed diesel's failed," he said. "Go gently until you reach it, push it to the next loop, and then go round in front to pull it home." "Phew," remarked James. "But what about the express passengers? They won't want to make our stops." "Too bad," said the signalman. "Better that way than your people missing their stations." James found the failed train about 2 miles in front. He pushed it to the next station and then got ready to pull. "I'm sorry I can't help," apologised Emma, who was in front, "but we are special lightweight coaches." "That's lucky," said James, who was already feeling puffed. But he found it easier than he expected. Once the train was moving, the coaches followed smoothly. As for the passengers, if they wondered about the extra stops, they didn't complain. The Fat Controller met them. "I'm sorry we're late, sir," said James. "That's all right, James," said the Fat Controller. "I'm pleased with you. You have saved an awkward situation. Now, please make Pip and Emma welcome in the shed while I arrange their journey home." The other engines were quiet at first, but they soon found the diesels friendly, and before long they were all laughing together. James was glad Gordon was away. He might, he thought, so easily have said something to upset them. Gordon came home next day. The Fat Controller forgave him for his smokescreen and said that he was sorry for thinking his spoiled top hat had been Gordon's fault. It had, he explained, been a steward emptying an ashtray from a carriage window. "Now, Gordon," he continued, "while you were in Carlisle, we borrowed a high-speed train. This has failed, and I want you to take her passengers home." He paused and smiled. "Show them how we do things, eh?" "I certainly will," promised Gordon. "Right," said Gordon's driver as they backed towards the train. "Today, Gordon, my lad, you can have the run of your life." He did too. Douglas was waiting to pull Pip and Emma home when Gordon passed. "Boop, boop, boop," whistled Gordon proudly, and with a swish and a roar he was gone. Pip and Emma watched enviously. Douglas chuckled. "Oh," he said to himself, "yon Gordon's aye a high-speed engine, but it's me who's pulling the high-speed train." Our next story is taken from the book Thomas Comes Home by Christopher Awdry and is called Snow Problem. While Thomas was away at York, Percy looked after Annie and Clarabelle and took most of Thomas's trains. Daisy ran the fast one, which connected with Gordon's Express at the junction. This made her feel very important. "It shows how the Fat Controller depends on me," she told the others. Toby was in charge of the goods trains and ran down to the harbour. He enjoyed that. His stone trains were dealt with by Mavis, the diesel belonging to the quarry company. One day, snow on the other railway had delayed the train from London, so Gordon's Express was late too. While Daisy was waiting for him at the junction, the blizzard spread across Sodor. Huge white flakes whirled all round, and her driver was worried. Daisy wasn't. "What fun," she said to herself. "The other engines don't like snow, but I think it's pretty, and I've got the rails to guide me, so it won't give me any trouble." Her driver was not so confident. "Daisy hasn't got the weight that a steam engine has," her driver told the guard. "She can't push her way through, and we all know how Thomas got stuck, don't we?" "He's told us often enough," laughed the guard. At last Gordon arrived, complaining about engines who were frightened of a bit of snow. "It's no problem," boasted Daisy. "A few flimsy flakes can't stop me." "Quite right," approved Gordon. "Well done, but I'm late. I haven't time to gossip." He puffed importantly away. Daisy started confidently, but as they turned towards the valley, the sky darkened and then was completely blotted out by whirling snowflakes. "Ugh!" exclaimed Daisy as the wind blew them into her face. "I don't like this." "Neither do I," said her driver. "I can't see where we're going." They stopped at the next signal box, and Daisy's driver went to talk to the signalman. He came back looking glum. "There are deep drifts ahead, I'm afraid," he told the passengers. "We can't get through." "The signalman says Daisy must take you back to the last station," he went on. "We'll get you home from there somehow." "If we're lucky," the passengers said to themselves. They weren't. Before they had gone far, Daisy began to feel ill. She coughed, hiccuped, and stopped. "Help!" she wheezed. "I can't breathe properly." "The snow has blocked your air intake, I expect," said her driver. He cleared it, but it was soon clogged again. Daisy could go no further. She felt like bursting into tears. The driver got down again and trudged back to the signal box to telephone for help. Daisy felt more miserable every minute. Even her driver, when he came back, couldn't cheer her up. "They've promised to rescue us," he said, "but goodness knows how they'll do it." They waited and waited, but no help came. The snow drifted higher and was soon piled all round Daisy. Suddenly she heard a whirring noise from behind. "Oh no," she thought, "not another blizzard." Daisy was right. It wasn't another blizzard. It was Harold the helicopter. He dropped hot drinks for the passengers, and when they were feeling better, he lifted them one by one into himself with what Daisy could only describe as a sort of chair thing. The passengers went to the airfield, where they were looked after until they could reach home. Harold couldn't help Daisy. It was a cold, miserable week before Toby rescued her. She doesn't think snow is so pretty now. Wasn't Harold a hero?
Hello, boys and girls.
Are you ready to enjoy some more exciting stories about Thomas the Tank Engine and his friends? The first story is taken from the book Really Useful Engines and is called Stop Thief. Thomas stood at Farquhar, the top station of his branch line. He had run round Annie and Clarabel after the morning journey and was enjoying a short rest before the run back down the valley. His driver and fireman stood beside his cab talking to the guard who'd brought startling news. "Did you know that the station master was burgled last night?" he was asking. Thomas's driver shook his head. "You don't say," he exclaimed. "I didn't know he had anything worth stealing." "He's won cups for gardening," exclaimed the fireman. "All taken, and then the scoundrels had the cheek to pinch his car to carry them away in." "Not that new one he's so proud of," said the driver. The guard nodded, and at that moment the signal rose to show that the line was clear. The driver and fireman climbed into Thomas's cab. The guard blew his whistle, waved his green flag, and got into Clarabel, and Thomas set off. By the time they were through the tunnel, the train was running nicely. Road and railway were beside each other here, with only a stream between them. Thomas remembered his race with Bertie the bus. He'd only won because he could go through the hill, while Bertie had to go over it. A flash of colour on the road ahead caught his eye. He tried to go faster to look more closely. "Steady, Thomas," said his driver. "There's plenty of time." "Can't we get closer to that car?" panted Thomas. "It looks like station masters to me." "Lots of cars look like that," laughed the driver, but he opened the regulator and they began to draw level. There were two men in the car. They waved when they saw Thomas and tried to go faster. "That's the car all right, Thomas," said the fireman, "and those two must be the thieves. But we can't stop them, and they'll be gone long before the next station." "We need pencil, paper, and something to put a note in," said the driver. "We'll throw a message out the next signal box." Quickly, he wrote the note, and they put it in the fireman's empty lunch tin. Then, drawing ahead of the car, Thomas whistled to attract the signalman's attention. They slowed so that the fireman could throw the box up to him, and as they went past, both driver and fireman shouted "Police!" at the top of their voices. By now, the stolen car had gone well ahead, and Thomas did not see it again. But the signalman telephoned police headquarters at once, and the thieves were stopped at a roadblock about 10 miles further on. That afternoon, the Fat Controller travelled in Annie to Farquhar. When he got there, he and the station master climbed onto a porter's trolley. They told the passengers the whole story, and the station master thanked Thomas, his driver, and his fireman for their prompt action. The passengers cheered loudly, and they cheered even more when they heard that the station master's gardening cups had all been found undamaged in a sack in the boot of the car. "A long time ago," said the Fat Controller, holding up his hand for silence, "Thomas showed how valuable he is to the smooth running of my railway. I am sure you will all agree that today he has once again proved himself to be a really useful engine." The next story is called Mind That Bike. Percy had never known Tom Tipper to be anything but cheerful. Tom was postman at Farquhar, and every morning he would have a cheery word for Percy as he helped to load the mailbags onto the train. Percy then took them to the town, where there was a big office for sorting the letters. But one morning Tom wasn't there. A postman they didn't know just dumped the bags on the platform and bicycled off without stopping to help. "What's happened to Tom?" wondered Percy's driver. "And his old van," added the fireman. "No wonder the new chap looks fed up. Carrying mail bags on a bike would make anyone miserable." Tom was soon back, but without his van. During his illness, it had been decided that the van was too expensive to run. Poor Tom was no longer cheerful, and now had no time to help load the train. "I wish I could cheer him up," sighed Percy, the small engine. One day, a man came from the station office to tell Tom that some papers needed signing. "Oh dear," he said anxiously, "this is going to make me very late." He asked Percy to keep an eye on his bicycle while he was gone, and propped it carefully against the fence near the platform ramp. He was gone a long time, and had not returned when Percy was ready to go. Some boys were playing on the platform, and Percy was worried. "Sorry, Percy," said his driver, "we must be off. Time and the Fat Controller wait for no man." In the flurry of starting, no one noticed that one of the boys had picked up Tom's bicycle. He pedalled too far along the platform, and before he could stop, ran out of control down the ramp. He reached the bottom just as Percy started away. Fortunately, the boy fell clear in time, but the bicycle swerved beneath Percy's wheels and disappeared with a crunch. Percy's driver stopped the train quickly, and they extracted the remains, but the red bicycle was beyond repair. Tom came running, and he, the driver, the station master, and the guard all told the boys what bad boys they were. "I'm sorry, Mr. Tipper," apologised Percy. "Never mind, Percy," said the postman. "It wasn't your fault, and I never liked that bike much anyway." When the Fat Controller heard about the accident, he ordered that Tom should be provided with a new bicycle at once. But next morning, when Percy arrived at Farquhar, he saw a brand new red van standing in the yard beside the ruins of the bicycle. Close by stood Tom Tipper, beaming from ear to ear. "That accident did me a good turn, Percy," he smiled, "and now my chief has decided to let me have a new van after all." "So I did help," said Percy to himself when Tom had gone. "By accident, as you might say." Our next story is simply called Fish. The fishermen who used the port near the big station were bringing in more fish than ever before. Each day the sheds on the quayside were piled high with boxes. Much of this extra fish had to travel by rail, so the trains which Henry and the other engines had to pull became heavier. One night, a special load of fish was ordered, and the Fat Controller decided that extra vans must be added to the train that the men called the Flying Kipper. The only spare vans that they could find were old ones that had been standing unused on a siding for some time. Workmen cleaned them quickly, and they were added to the tail of the train. Henry grumbled dreadfully about it, but there was nothing to be done. "You'll just have to put up with it, Henry," said his driver. "At least the extra load will mean we can have a banker up Gordon's Hill." Duck often waited at Edward Station so that he could help heavy trains by pushing behind. Tonight Henry made good progress in spite of his extra load. When they reached Edward Station, his driver stopped the train beyond the platform. Then, using Henry's whistle, he gave the special signal which meant that he wanted help up the hill. "Peep, peep, peep, peep," whistled Henry. "I need a banker, please." "Peep, peep," replied Duck. "I shan't be long." Duck buffered gently up to Henry's train. He was not coupled on so that Henry could run on without stopping when they reached the top. "Ready?" Duck whistled. Pull hard, puffed Henry. We're doing it, replied Duck. Henry was pulling harder than he thought. It was a dark night, and Duck felt the weight on his buffers slacken. Because of the dark, he could not see that Henry had taken the train on his own and was slowly drawing ahead. All trains carry a red lamp on the final vehicle to show that the train is complete. This is called a tail lamp. Duck's driver began to be worried. "There's no sign of a tail lamp," he said to the fireman, "but we must keep going." Duck whistled, but there was no reply from Henry. Henry, meanwhile, was going well, but his train seemed to be getting heavier. He had to keep moving, but he could not avoid slowing down. Suddenly, from behind him, there came a splintering crash. Duck's front bent and pieces of broken wood began to fall on him, one of them denting his funnel. He stopped quickly, and Henry, feeling the jolt, stopped too, just beyond the top of the hill. Over Gordon's Hill, a smell of fish hung on the air. By the light of torches, the drivers and firemen tried to work out what had happened, while the guard ran back down the hill to warn the signalman. When daylight came, it was all too obvious. The lamp iron on the old van, which should have held the tail lamp, had broken, and the lamp had fallen off at the bottom of the hill. "Not your fault, Duck," said the Fat Controller. "That lamp iron should have been checked. Don't worry, we'll soon have your funnel and front straightened out." "Thank you, sir," said Duck sadly. "Thomas told me once to be careful about fish. He was right, sir, wasn't he?" Our next adventure is called Triple Header. Gordon was resting in a siding. It was a hot day, and the express had been heavy. "I get so out of breath," he complained, "but nobody cares. They just say I'll be all right after a rest." "Get the Fat Controller to give you tanks and a bunker," suggested Thomas cheekily. "You'll feel a new engine. We tank engines never get out of breath, you know." Perhaps it was lucky for Thomas that poor Gordon hadn't the energy to reply. The men worked hard on Gordon, but they couldn't make him better. "You need new tubes, Gordon," they said. "You'll have to go to the works to have them fitted." While Gordon was being mended, Henry pulled the express. But one morning, just before Gordon was due back, Henry was ill too. "We've no spare engine except Thomas," the inspector told the Fat Controller, "but he can't pull the train on his own." "Could Percy help?" asked the Fat Controller. The inspector shook his head. "The two of them with Duck might manage," he suggested. "It's only as far as the works. They're sure to have a spare engine there." So the 3 tank engines were coupled together, Thomas nearest the train, Duck in the middle, and Percy at the front. Then, slowly, they started. Come on," fussed Percy importantly. We're doing it, puffed Duck. Pull harder, rumbled Thomas to the others. The heavy train drew out of the platform. The engines couldn't go as fast as Gordon, but the passengers didn't mind. They knew that Percy, Thomas and Duck were doing their best. Expresses are not like branch line trains. They don't stop at all the stations, and the engines don't have a chance to get their breath back. Soon the 3 began to feel tired. They struggled valiantly up Gordon's hill, but the strain was beginning to tell. "I'm glad we didn't stick there," thought Thomas. "Gordon would never have let us hear the last of it." But the hill proved too much for Percy. His driver blew his whistle and stopped the train. "We can't take you off, Percy," said Thomas's driver. "Do the best you can to keep your brakes off. It's not far now." This made things harder for the other 2, but they struggled gamely on, twin columns of steam shooting high into the air. We're nearly there, puffed Thomas and Duck together as they summoned a last brave effort. Poor Percy had no steam left to say anything. They were just passing the works when Duck found he could go no further. Thomas could not pull the heavy train on his own, and the cavalcade came to a standstill a few yards short of the station platform. And there, standing watching from the works siding, stood Gordon. The Fat Controller, who'd been on the train, told the 3 engines he was proud of them. "You did very well to get so far," he said, "and now you deserve a rest." Duck, Percy and Thomas were uncoupled, and a new engine took their place. As the tank engines moved wearily away, Gordon looked at Thomas and smiled. Then he took 3 deep breaths and winked. He didn't need to say anything. Thomas knew exactly what he meant. These next stories are taken from the book Great Little Engines by Christopher Awdry, and the first one is called Patience is a Virtue. The thin controller held a letter in his hand. 6 little engines watched him anxiously. "Do you remember Tally Clin, your twin?" he asked Scarloy. "He is ill, so his controller is short of an engine. Now, I can't spare anyone until Duke is mended, but I want to suggest to him that one of us—" "Oh, sir, please, sir!" cried the engines excitedly. The thin controller held his ears. "You can't all go," he laughed. "I thought Sir Handel—" "Oh, sir," said Sir Handel happily. A few days later, Duke was taken to the works. Sir Handel's excitement grew. "I hope he comes back quickly," he said to anyone who would listen. "Don't be so impatient," his driver laughed. "There's a lot to be done. Your repairs took a long time, remember, and Duke is older than you." The weeks passed, and still Duke didn't come back. Sir Handel became more and more impatient. One day he was waiting at the bottom station when Gordon arrived. "I've been invited to Wales," Sir Handel told him importantly, "but I can't be spared until Duke is mended." "Quite right," said Gordon. "It's a great responsibility being indispensable." "Gordon says I'm, insensible," Sir Handel boasted to the others. They were amused, but not impressed. Summer came and crowds of visitors came to the railway. Sometimes extra coaches were needed to carry them all. One day, Sir Handel's train was fuller than ever. When he reached the top station, he was exhausted. An enormous crowd of people was waiting on the platform for the last train home. "They must have come on earlier trains and stayed to picnic by the lake," said the fireman. "Never mind, we'll manage. It's all downhill now." But at the station near the waterfall, the platform was full too. "We need a shoehorn to get them all in," exclaimed the guard, scratching his head. "Still, we'll have to do it somehow. I'll take some with me in Beatrice." The passengers had enjoyed their day in the hills and didn't mind standing. They knew it would be only for a short while. The guard always checked tickets at the station by the waterfall. Today it was a long job, and before he had half finished, Sir Handel was growing impatient. "An insensible engine like me shouldn't keep Henry waiting," he fumed. "Can't be helped," said his driver. "Henry will just have to wait. He's kept us at it before now." At last the guard was ready. He blew his whistle, waved his green flag, and turned towards Beatrice. "At last we're off, do come along, at last we're off, do come along," Sir Handel snorted impatiently. Quickly the train began to move. The guard tried to get into Beatrice, but her doorway was blocked by passengers. By the time they'd moved to let him in, the train was out of the station and the guard was left standing on the platform. Beatrice tried to stop, but there was no one to put her brakes on. The guard blew his whistle and waved a red flag, but the line curved and Sir Handel couldn't see or hear him. Luckily, a passenger in Beatrice knew what to do. He pressed a button and a buzzer sounded in Sir Handel's cab. His driver braked hard. "Now what?" he asked the fireman. "Go and find out. Maybe we've left someone behind." They had, of course. They soon discovered who. Passengers helped the guard into Beatrice, and after a fast run, the train reached the terminus at the same time as Henry. Sir Handel stopped with a sigh of relief. The guard came to see him. "I'm sorry I was impatient, Mr. Guard," said Sir Handel nervously. "I didn't want to be late. Insensible engines shouldn't be late, should they?" "No," agreed the guard, "but sensible engines know that patience is a virtue. Remember that next time." "I'll try," promised Sir Handel sadly. And now a story called Peter Sam and the Prickly Problem. Duke returned at last, and Sir Handel went away. The other engines were kept so busy that they didn't have time to miss him. Hedge cutters had been busy too, trimming trees and bushes beside the railway so that passengers could see the view. Each evening Rusty took some trucks up the line and carried away as many cuttings as he could. But he could manage only a few at a time, and as fast as he moved the cuttings, more took their place. It was Peter Sam's turn to take the morning train. The coaches were full, but the rails were dry, and Peter Sam didn't mind the extra load. He puffed happily along until, just beyond the tunnel, he found that, in the night, a high wind had blown hedge cuttings across the rails. He stopped, and his driver and fireman got down. "We'll never get through that lot," exclaimed the fireman. "Pooh," scoffed Peter Sam. "They're only little branches, nothing to it. We'll simply push them aside." "Have it your own way," said his driver. "If we stop to clear up properly, we shall be here for ages, and some of the passengers might miss their train at the bottom station." Peter Sam puffed bravely on. He went carefully at first, and the branches slid aside easily. Then came a stretch where the cuttings were brambles. Peter Sam began to regret his boasting. Not only were the thorns prickly, but they caught in each other, and the branches stayed firmly put. "Ouch!" exclaimed Peter Sam suddenly, and stopped. "I can't move," he complained. The fireman looked. "It's no good," he said at last. "You've got brambles caught in your valve gear, and steam can't get into your cylinders. We shall have to cut you out." Peter Sam shuddered. He shut his eyes and prepared for the worst. The fireman pulled on thick gloves. Then, while he tried to clear what he could, the driver went to ask the guard if he had a knife. Some of the passengers had knives too, and came to help. But even then the job took longer than expected, and by the time Peter Sam was free, there was no hope of getting the passengers round the lake and back before James's train left. Peter Sam's driver apologised to the passengers, but they said they didn't mind. "We enjoyed the adventure," they laughed. The driver telephoned the thin controller. On the way home, they passed Rusty, pulling a long train of trucks. Rusty worked hard, and by afternoon the line was clear for trains to run normally. Peter Sam's front felt uncomfortable for several days. The others laughed and teased him. "Take a snowplow next time," they suggested, and they kept asking if he had a sharp knife in his cab. At last Scarloy told them to stop. "I really can't think what all the fuss is for," remarked Duncan innocently. "They were only little branches after all. Nothing to get prickly about, surely."